So Rob, welcome. This is our first YouTube video. We're planning on posting this to YouTube. We've done some podcast episodes together, and this one we want to specifically focus on DAOs. Now, this is going to be a little free-flowing consciousness right here, but I think it'll be fun for us because you and I are both playing in the space. Why don't you start out by telling everyone what you do, and then a little bit about the crypto conference you went to in Portugal late last year?
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan, for having me. I'm a finance lawyer, 20 years working in international finance of one way or another. The last few years, I have been somewhat focused on cryptocurrency, digital assets, both on the investor side and on the structure side. And over the last 6 months, I've been really focused on it to the tune of almost 90% of my overall practice. In November of last year, I attended in Lisbon, Portugal. I attended the Solana conference, and we are actively looking to go and participate in a lot of these conferences, which are all over the world right now. The movement is real. I think there's an opportunity for good lawyers that have the right approach, and so that's part of what I'm trying to do here.
So how were you received at the Solana conference? I really haven't talked to you since then very much. So this is a great chance to download. I'm curious because I was at a conference just last week in Salt Lake City. They called it Cryptopia. And I met one other lawyer there, and he was a cybersecurity lawyer, not a finance or a transaction lawyer like you and I are. And so I thought it was really interesting I'm curious, how was everyone talking about this movement, right? I mean, are lawyers even in the picture yet? Is this very much a rise of the coders and the proletariats against all systems? And does that include lawyers too? I know they don't like us. Nobody likes us, right? But we're a necessary evil.
That's actually a really good question. I'm Gen X, right? So I was born in 1971, so I'm exactly Gen X. And so I think that that's the first click against me. And even before they find out that I'm actually a lawyer, and then to be a Gen X lawyer that is sort of perceived as part of the problem, or at least part of the legacy that is so much of what decentralized or DeFi wants to move against or move away from, that I think that I get two reactions, especially when I interact, say like in Portugal at the Solana conference or wherever in the space, even virtually. I tend to get two responses. One is defensive, that is they just assume that I come in with a certain amount of old school paradigm and that I'm going to be ultimately an impediment to what they're trying to achieve with DeFi. That's sort of one group. And the other group is, we really need lawyers in the space, and you're interested in the space, so why don't we pull you in further? Could you help us with this or with that? Just one case in point, I was recently hired by a DAO, by a Decentralized Autonomous Organization, an existing one, to help them with some legal work. And it was announced within their smart contract, within their participant base, that I was going to come on and help. And I was immediately attacked and praised at the exact same time on Twitter. People actually, DAO participants within that DAO, sought me out and basically said, "Stay out, you evil Gen Xer. We don't need you and your legacy types in this space. And decentralization is sacred, and don't you dare disrupt it." And then I had others that were saying, "Wow, we realize now after 4 or 5 months of operating as a DAO that you actually do need lawyers. You do need sort of old school traditional thought process and strategy around what we're ultimately trying to achieve." And I agree with both those positions, to be honest with you. I frankly think that my interaction with lawyers that are trying to understand the space and that are trying to inch in at the possibility of getting into the space, they need to do a fair amount of paradigm shifting themselves. They need to be able to be creative within their knowledge base and their skill set to be able to work with structures and opportunities within DeFi. And that's the approach that I'm trying to take. So I sort of not offended by either approach and sort of embrace and love both approaches, because I think ultimately that you can achieve DeFi within traditional structures.
And that's a great perspective. I think that a lot of people who aren't used to interacting with lawyers think that we are there to kill the deal, right? We're there to make things fall apart, to make it too difficult, to make it too painful for the other side or whoever's opposite who we're working for. But I think those who interact with people like us find that we are the business type. We're the creative types who want to understand everything and want to find a way to make it work, right? We're ultimately the ones who we thrive on getting deals done and figuring out creative ways to make it happen. I think you articulate that very well. So let's turn. I think we're trying to keep this to about 15 minutes. So we'll see how successful we are at that, because we want to keep it in nice, small, bite-sized portions. We'll come back and talk later about other things. So what about this concept of decentralization? I mean, we have the idea. Maybe we start with a corporate form. Okay, let's talk about that, because you wrote a blog post recently, and I've been following your work and learning on my own too. But I want to say every jurisdiction in the world, someone's got authority, right? I mean, there are these kind of forward-thinking offshore jurisdictions that are doing things, but in most jurisdictions, if you and I want to get together and do anything, we are de facto a partnership. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that it's a true paradox, and in that if you are a nothing, but you're venturing with a group, just like you said, you are in most jurisdictions, in most common law jurisdictions, you are considered a partnership, so you are a thing. And if you don't actually go through the process of formalizing what that thing is, it may be the wrong thing for tax purposes, for liability purposes. Ultimately, if you want to function as a general partnership, that's a possibility. An unstated, unfiled general partnership, it definitely is a possibility, but most likely it's going to be the wrong thing. There'll be limited liability issues, or liability issues. There's going to be tax payment issues. There's going to be an ability to hire and fire developers and that sort of thing. So there's real practical reasons that a general partnership probably isn't the right thing for you to be. So then you say, well, what am I? And again, we've already talked a little bit about it. I won't keep going over it, but those that are participating in DAOs, and what I mean by that are those that are jumping in with their resources, their cash, and they're jumping in and participating in the DAOs. A lot of those are sort of part of this global movement that don't want structure and form. They actually like the autonomy of participating, of owning, without having those structures. But again, there's just reasons that ultimately you're going to want to do that, and we're seeing that play out already. I think in the initial phase, in this initial push of DAOs, there is something of a romantic tie, almost a dogmatic sense that decentralization, DeFi, is the way to go, but ultimately it just practically doesn't work. And so you have to choose what you're going to do about that. And there are some options that we're starting to work through and be creative through.
So let me interject a second, because everyone who hasn't been around longer than 30 years may not know that the corporate community in the legal world developed LLCs to get away from partnerships.
That's
so
a
even though
great
people
point.
may say, well, fine, I'm a partnership. Okay, I understand we got liability and things, but we created LLCs in the 90s to get away from partnerships. And so that DAOs are now inadvertently backing back into law that we tried to get rid of 30 years ago, or we stepped away from 30 years ago. A lot of people may not be aware of that, right? Anyone, like I said, anyone who's younger than 50 probably has no concept of this.
That's exactly right, and in fact, that could serve as something of an analogy for what I believe will happen, and we're seeing it already. I'm physically located in the state of Utah, and am part of a legislative committee to help deal with legislative options around DAOs. We've talked a little bit also about Wyoming. Wyoming, in their last legislative session, I think about a year ago, they wrapped their LLC code around a DAO in an effort to attract DAO organizations to come to Wyoming, to incorporate in Wyoming, and to get all the benefits of an LLC. The problem with that is that it doesn't exactly fit. Every DAO is different. Every DAO has different level of participants. Every DAO has participants from all over the world. It tries to fit, and I think that Wyoming should be commended for trying and attempting to fit, but it ultimately probably doesn't fit. And what I think that you'll see are jurisdictions specifically crafting legislation, just like we did with LLCs, we're going to do ultimately, I believe, with DAOs. That is to create legislative flexibility to where they can be, to a large extent, decentralized, but also having corporate form and corporate structure to do and to carry out regular corporate functions. I think that's where we're going, but we're not there yet, which is part of the problem.
Okay, so what else is on your mind? You've been meeting with organizers of DAOs. What is happening as people are trying to marry money together with a DAO? I mean, you don't have to have a DAO with money, but a lot of them do. A lot of them are forming for some kind of what I would call a business purpose. So, what are you seeing, and how are you talking around that idea of marrying money into DAOs? The intersection of your traditional corporate finance background with what you're seeing now.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's working. I think it'll be a lot like the Web3 industry generally, in that you'll have winners and you'll have losers, and you'll have those that are first through the gates. And it's still, even though DAOs I think have been around, I think the first one was launched in 2016, so they've sort of been around a while now. But there's a real push last year, and then I think into this year, I'm feeling and hearing and seeing and participating as a lawyer in a lot of the buzz and the activity, and they tend to work if they can be identified to purpose, if they can attract a certain segment or audience specific to their overall purpose. They tend to really work well, whether that be to raise money around investing in NFTs, which you see a lot of, whether you see traditional using it as a vehicle to raise in certain segments, certain businesses like insurance and global insurance. We're seeing that as well. I think it's a really effective way to globally crowdsource a concept or an idea or a business. And so I think that the trend is only heading north, and you're going to see more regulation. You're going to see more jurisdictions, both from an inviting standpoint, trying to create this type of legislation that attracts DAOs, and you're going to see more opportunity to participate. That is, if you have a digital wallet, if you have this knowledge, this skill set, and how to participate and play in the Web3 space, this will be a really nice place that you can diversify your overall participation and join and jump in some of these DAOs. So, as a finance lawyer that's been involved in M&A, that's been involved in private equity and venture capital, I see it as a really cool trend that's only going to increase in both those that are participating and you'll see more traditional finance businesses jumping in as well. Private equities, venture capital, perhaps mortgage companies, perhaps insurance, more traditional more traditional companies that are using a DAO mechanism to create cash.
Okay, so for our last minute and a half, can you tease a little bit about, I know it's gone by quickly, but we wanted to keep this in a reasonable chunk. So in the last minute and a half, can you talk a little bit about the simplest DAO form, as you've been trying to craft, marrying DAOs in good jurisdictions with the corporate form? What is the simplest? I want to say, what is the least number of countries involved in creating a true global DAO that you think works at this point in time?
Yeah. Okay. So here are the fundamentals for legal form DAO structure. Okay. I like offshore structures because I think that one jurisdiction is better than multiple jurisdictions, in that if you form in the United States, say if you form an LLC and then you want to be creative outside of LLCs, or you go to Wyoming and LLC, you still have a federal government overlay to everything that you do. And that is just uncertain right now. So I like offshore entities because they are specific jurisdictions that are trying to accommodate so much of what's going on in the space. They're ahead of the United States, for example. BVI, Cayman Islands, I like Gibraltar as well. Singapore is doing a fair amount. Panama is actually doing a fair amount. What I like to do then is create limited entities in those jurisdictions with the right contract structure and connection between the smart contracts, actual legal connection between the smart contracts and then designated boards. And then there's a possibility of bifurcating those functions, that one segment of that bifurcation is always under some level of limited liability, corporate formation, so they can do a lot of things they want to do, but yet the DeFi itself is allowed to stay in place. And there's sort of a protocol DeFi aspect to it. And then there's sort of corporate form that's wrapped around a corporate structure. That is the creation or the creative approach that we're starting to take. And we believe it will ultimately work. There will be country to country application. There will still be where we still have questions like, where are you developing? Where are your developers? Where are some of your activities? We still have a lot of that to sort of sort out on a case-by-case basis. But I like the offshore bifurcation strategy, and we're having some success putting those together.
That's great. So maybe the next time we talk, we can dig in really deep into the forms and the specific jurisdictions, in the U.S., outside the U.S., where the forward thinkers are. And I also would love to hear ongoing updates about your work in the Utah legislature, so that we kind of get a sneak peek into how Utah is adapting and maybe doing it in a better way than Wyoming or any other jurisdiction has so far. All right, I think that's it, Rob. That was great. Thanks for the time.